Welcome, weary traveler. You've left the noise of the world behind and stepped into a realm untouched by time. Here, candlelight dances upon ancient stone walls, and the air carries the soft hum of forgotten lullabies. Beyond these gates, the night is gentle, and every story is a silver thread, weaving warmth around your heart. So, rest your mind. Let each word be a quiet step into the halls of dreams, until sleep, tender and deep, finds you. You are safe here, and the world drifts away. Chapter 1. A Kingdom Wrapped in Quiet. The kingdom of Arinder had always been a place where silence was never empty. It was not the silence of absence, nor of loneliness. It was the kind of quiet that breathed, the kind that wrapped around every stone, every leaf, and every cottage as though the world itself wished to cradle those who lived within it. The hills rolled gently outward from the heart of the kingdom, their curves soft and endless, touched by the silver of moonlight when night descended. And at the kingdom's edge lay the ancient forest, where legends whispered of nymphs who sang under midnight skies, their voices drifting like lullabies through the trees. On this evening, the air was calm. The breeze moved gently through the valley, carrying with it the faint fragrance of jasmine and wood smoke. Lanterns glowed softly in the village streets, their warm light spilling across cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of peaceful footsteps. In the distance, the castle rose, not imposing, but steady, its towers crowned by ivy, its windows glowing like fireflies in the velvet dusk. It was a castle built not for war, but for shelter. Its halls welcomed rather than commanded, and its walls seemed to hold warmth rather than secrecy. Sir Caliph, a knight of quiet reputation, walked slowly along the village path that led toward the castle. His armor, though polished, was plain, reflecting not the harsh glint of battle but the soft shimmer of moonlight. He carried no sword this evening, only a cloak wrapped around his shoulders, for tonight was not a night of duty, but of wandering. He liked to walk these paths at twilight, when the world grew softer, when even the stones seemed to hum with peace. The rhythm of his boots against the earth was steady and unhurried, each step keeping time with the low murmur of crickets hidden in the grass. As he passed the cottages, doors stood ajar to release the warmth of hearth fires. Families gathered within, their laughter quiet and gentle, as though softened by the hour. From one window spilled the faint sound of Corvian's lute, each note falling like a drop of water into a still pool. From another, the fragrance of fresh bread drifted outward, mingling with the cool air until the whole lane seemed touched with the comfort of a bakery. Caliph paused for a moment to breathe it in. Such small things, he thought, were the treasures that gave life its meaning. The nymphs of the forest might sing their midnight songs, but here in the village, life had its own music, simple, tender, and endlessly steady. Ahead, the castle gates stood open. They were not guarded harshly, for there was no need. Arinder had known no war in living memory, and the gates were more often a threshold of welcome than a line of defense. Beyond the gates stretched the courtyard, where fountains whispered and gardens grew even under the touch of moonlight. Roses unfolded pale petals that glimmered faintly, and ivy traced its way up stone walls as if painting with green ink upon the canvas of the castle. The air within the courtyard carried the scent of lavender, grown in wide beds so that the fragrance drifted upward into the chambers above, ensuring that those who rested within the castle always dreamt in peace. Caliph moved toward one of the benches by the fountain. He sat, resting his hands loosely upon his knees, and lifted his gaze to the sky. The moon was high and whole, its silver light touching the waters of the fountain, breaking into 1,000 shimmering fragments that danced like stars made liquid. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening not just to the fountain but to everything. The quiet murmur of villagers settling into sleep, the distant toll of a bell marking the hour, the faint call of an owl from the forest's edge. All these sounds together wove a lullaby that seemed to settle not only over the land, but over his very thoughts. It was said in Arinder that when the night grew deepest, the nymphs began their song. Few had ever ventured into the forest to hear it clearly, for the villagers felt no need to seek it. They believed the song drifted out of the trees on its own, carried upon the wind, wrapping itself around the kingdom like a second blanket. Some said it was this song that kept the valley free of strife. Others said it was simply the kindness of those who lived here, of Leora's flowers gifted freely, of Brantho's hearth always open to travelers, of Silwen's herbs left upon doorsteps for the weary. Caliph liked to believe it was both, that the voices of unseen guardians and the daily gentleness of human hearts worked together, as one to cradle Irinder in peace. The fountain continued its endless rhythm, and Calipha's breath slowed to match it. The glow of the lanterns around the courtyard dimmed slightly as the night deepened, their flames soft, their halos warm. From the great hall, a faint music drifted outward. Corvian's harp this time, strings brushed lightly in practice rather than performance. The notes joined the fountain's murmur, weaving into the gentle tapestry of sound. For a time, Caliph sat unmoving. His eyes grew heavy, not with sleep but with the deep calm that comes from being fully present in a safe and steady world. The thought crossed his mind that perhaps this was the true gift of the forest nymphs. Not their unseen presence, but the way their legend reminded people to listen, to notice the softness of a breeze, the warmth of a fire, the peace that could always be found if one slowed enough to feel it. He imagined them now, beneath the canopy of the midnight forest, their voices rising not as command nor warning, but as pure, endless comfort. And though he could not hear them clearly, he knew the song was there, just beyond the trees, waiting, patient as moonlight. He leaned back against the bench, closing his eyes again. The night stretched on, slow and steady, a ribbon of hours tied together with quiet threads. No urgency called, no danger lurked, only the promise of another gentle day to come, when the sun would return and the valley would wake to warmth once more. For now, it was enough simply to sit, to breathe, and to let the kingdom cradle him in its endless calm. And in that stillness, Irinder slept. Chapter 2. The Castle at Dusk. The castle of Irinder was not built to intimidate, nor to shine with jewels or gold. Its strength lay instead in its calm presence, its walls softened by ivy and moss, its towers more like watchful companions than stern guardians. From the village, the castle appeared as though it had grown naturally from the hill itself, as if the earth had chosen to lift this place upward to watch over the land. And when dusk deepened into night, the windows glowed with the tender light of countless candles, their flames swaying gently in the stillness, like stars that had chosen to live within stone. Inside the castle, the halls were wide but never cold. Tapestries hung along the walls, their threads woven with stories not of conquest, but of harvests, festivals, and the turning of seasons. The floors, though polished, carried the soft creak of age, each step echoing faintly yet warmly. In the grand hall, the heart of the castle's evening life, the tables had been cleared after supper, and the fragrance of roasted herbs lingered faintly in the air. Here, King Evren sat near the hearth, his robes of deep blue falling gently around him. Though he was king, his crown was simple, more a circlet of silver than a symbol of power. He was a man not weighed down by rule, but lifted by the trust of his people. His hair, touched faintly with silver at the temples, caught the firelight as he leaned back in his chair, watching the flames dance. There was no council gathered, no advisors murmuring, only the hush of the fire and the occasional shift of logs as they broke into embers. Beside him, Lady Dorian sat with her hands folded lightly in her lap. She wore a gown of soft cream, its fabric as flowing as river water, and her dark hair was pinned back with a simple clasp of pearl. Her gaze was quiet, thoughtful, but never heavy. When she spoke, her voice was like the hush of leaves stirred by evening wind. "The night is clear again," she said, her words drifting into the quiet between them. The moonlight touches the gardens as though it has chosen them above all else. Everin smiled faintly, his eyes warm though his lips barely moved. The gardens listen better than most, he replied softly. Perhaps the moon favors them because they never interrupt. Dorian's laughter was gentle and low, as though meant not to disturb the fire. It was a sound that filled the hall without echo, settling like a blanket rather than a bell. And yet, she said, tilting her head slightly toward the window, I think the village listens too. Do you not hear how still it is? As though the whole of Arinder has paused to wait for the nymphs to begin their song. The mention of the nymphs brought a slow nod from Everin. It is always so on nights like this. We never see them, and yet their voices move through us as though they live within our very breath. He looked toward the tall arched windows, where the moon shone through the glass in pale ribbons. Perhaps that is their way, not to be seen, but to remind us to listen, to cherish the silence until it is filled. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire's glow softened their faces, painting them in hues of amber and gold. In the quiet, the castle seemed to breathe, its walls holding centuries of whispers, of songs, of lullabies sung to children who had long since grown. Dorian closed her eyes briefly, letting the warmth of the hearth touch her skin. The notes were slow, deliberate, as though each one had been chosen to match the rhythm of the night itself. The strings trembled with care, filling the air with something more than music, something close to memory, or perhaps longing, though it carried no sorrow. Dorian tilted her head slightly, listening. He plays as though he knows the forest listens, she whispered. Perhaps it does, Everin answered softly. The hall seemed to grow even quieter as the harp continued. The candles flickered, their light wavering but never failing. The stone walls, touched with ivy even here within, seemed to soften in the glow. Dorian reached for a goblet of warmed cider that rested near her seat, and the steam rose in a gentle curl, carrying with it the sweetness of apples and spice. She sipped slowly, savoring the warmth as it spread through her chest, as if she were drawing the fire inward. Everin, too, lifted a goblet, though his sat untouched for a long while before he finally drank. His thoughts were not of policy or decree, but of the hush of his kingdom, the peace of his people, the slow rhythm of nights like these. He wondered if rulers elsewhere ever felt such stillness, or if it was only here, in Arinder, where the forest nymphs sang unseen, that such calm could settle so deeply. As the night stretched onward, a servant entered quietly, placing fresh logs upon the fire. The crackle was soft, the sparks few, and the servant withdrew without words. Dorian leaned slightly forward, her eyes on the flames as though searching for patterns within their dance. It is easy, she murmured, to believe that the fire itself hums with their song. Do you hear it? Beneath the crackle? A kind of hush that is not silence, but something deeper. Everin nodded slowly, listening as she described it. He heard it too, the faint undercurrent of peace, as though even the fire wished to join the lullaby of the night. Beyond the walls, the moon climbed higher, its silver light spilling over the gardens, the village, and the ancient forest beyond. Somewhere in that forest, voices stirred, soft, ethereal, unbound by the weight of human speech. Whether it was truly the song of the nymphs, or simply the rustle of leaves carried by wind, none within the castle could say. But the sound reached them nonetheless, filling the hall like a breath of cool air, weaving into the music of Corvian's harp, into the crackle of the fire, into the very rhythm of their hearts. For a long while, Everin and Dorian sat without words, their silence not empty, but full. The castle was at rest, its halls wrapped in quiet, its windows glowing faintly like watchful stars, and beyond the glass the forest sang. Chapter 3: The Village Beneath the Stars. The village of Arinder lay at the castle's feet like a cluster of glowing embers, each cottage a gentle flame, each lantern a star of its own. The lanes curved like ribbons, stone and earth winding between gardens and thatched roofs. At night, the village did not fall silent. It sighed, slowly and steadily, like a great creature resting in sleep. The rooftops, touched by the moon's silver hand, gleamed faintly as though dusted with frost, though the air was mild and kind. Smoke curled from chimneys, rising lazily before dissolving into the clear night sky. In the square, a single lantern swung from its iron post, its flame rocking with the faintest breeze, painting the cobbles with a shifting golden glow. Here, Leora, the village herbalist, lingered outside her cottage. She wore a shawl draped loosely across her shoulders, its edge embroidered with leaves and vines, a pattern she had stitched herself in quiet evenings long ago. In her hands, she held a small bundle of lavender, its fragrance rising with every breath she drew. Her face was lit by the moon, calm and thoughtful, her eyes reflecting both the silver above and the glow of her hearth within. Her garden, though small, was alive even in the quiet of night. Herbs bent gently to the breeze, their leaves whispering softly to one another. Lavender, thyme, rosemary, and mint released faint perfumes into the air, mixing with the earth's own scent and the smoke of distant fires. She bent once to touch a sprig, her fingers grazing the dew already forming on its leaves. There was peace in such gestures, small, patient, unhurried. Not far from her, the blacksmith Brandhose sat outside his forge. His tools were silent now, his anvil cooled, though the faint heat of the day's work still lingered within the stone walls. He leaned back on a sturdy wooden stool, arms crossed loosely, his gaze lifted toward the sky. By day, his shoulders bore the strength of hammers and iron, but by night, they softened, carrying no burden but the weight of stars. His beard caught the lantern light, glimmering with a faint copper hue, and his breath moved slowly, deeply, in rhythm with the night around him. He did not count the stars, nor search for patterns among them. He simply looked, letting them be as they were, innumerable, steady, endless. Sometimes he thought the forge itself echoed them, sparks rising when iron struck, brief lights against the dark, though never lasting. Yet here, in the sky, the sparks lingered forever. It was a thought that eased him, though he never said it aloud. Along the lane, a voice rose faintly, clear, soft, and unhurried. Silwyn, the weaver, hummed as she worked by candlelight near her cottage window. Her loom, though simple, moved with a rhythm like a heartbeat. The thread pulled, the shuttle passed, the fabric growing beneath her hands. The glow of her candle touched her face, outlining her cheek, her brow, her long fingers guiding each thread with patient care. She often hummed when she worked, and tonight her tune carried gently across the lane, blending with the rustle of leaves and the sigh of the breeze. Brandhose listened to it, his gaze still fixed on the sky. Leora heard it too, her bundle of lavender resting now against her lap as she sat upon the stone step of her garden. The sound did not intrude. It folded itself into the night like another star, another lantern, another ember of the whole. The brook that wound through the village murmured softly, its voice low but clear, as though it spoke in sleep. Its waters caught the moonlight, bending it into shifting patterns that danced upon stone and grass. Children had played there by day, their laughter loud and bright, but now the brook belonged to the quiet alone. Its lullaby was constant, weaving beneath all other sounds. Leora rose at last and walked slowly toward the square, her shawl trailing behind her. The lavender in her hand brushed softly against her skirt as she moved. Brandhose lifted his head slightly at her approach, though neither spoke immediately. Words were not urgent here. Silence was its own kind of language. She seated herself upon the edge of the fountain, its water glimmering faintly in moonlight. "It is a still night," she said at last, her voice hushed, as though not to disturb the stars. Brandhose nodded slowly, leaning forward slightly, his arms resting on his knees. "Still," he agreed, His tone was low, steady, carrying the weight of someone who rarely wasted speech. The forge feels quieter when the sky looks like this. Leora smiled faintly, lowering her gaze to the lavender she held. The herbs grow sweeter on such nights. Perhaps the earth listens when the heavens rest. From her window, Silwen's song shifted, rising a little, then falling again. The threads of her weaving brushed faintly against wood. Leora and Branthose sat without moving, letting the music fold around them. For a time, even the fountain seemed to hush itself, as if listening. Beyond the cottages, the fields stretched wide and silver, the grasses leaning gently with each sigh of wind. Owls moved soundlessly through the trees, their wings barely disturbing the air. A fox passed along the edge of the village, its paws soft upon the earth, its eyes glimmering in the dark. Paused briefly, listening before continuing into shadow. The night did not belong to urgency. It belonged to rhythm, to stillness, to the slow unfolding of hours like petals. Leora felt it in her breath, in the warmth of the lavender against her palm. Branthose felt it in the looseness of his shoulders, the ease of muscles that had worked all day. Silwen felt it in the smooth glide of thread, the way her loom seemed to hum in harmony with her tune. As the stars deepened, a faint sound drifted from the forest's edge. A voice, distant yet clear, like water poured from crystal. Then another weaving beneath it, higher and softer. The nymphs had begun their midnight song. Leora tilted her head slightly, her breath catching in quiet wonder. Branthose closed his eyes, listening without thought. Silwen's loom stilled, her fingers resting upon the thread as her voice joined, wordless, blending with the distant song. The nymphs sang not of sorrow, nor of joy, but of peace itself, an endless hush given form. The village heard it, every roof and stone, every leaf and lantern. And in that moment, the night felt whole, wrapped in a music that was both beyond and within. Chapter 4: The Forest Path. The forest did not begin suddenly. It arrived like a soft veil, a gradual folding of meadow into shadow, of open sky into branches laced with silver. Caliph walked the path with unhurried steps, his cloak brushing lightly against dew-soaked grass, his boots making no more sound than a heartbeat. The moon above followed him, weaving its light between the leaves, so that each step seemed guided by a soft, celestial hand. The path itself was narrow, but clear. Stones worn smooth by generations of passing feet lay beneath him, moss creeping between them, glowing faintly where the moon touched. On either side, the trees leaned gently together, their branches arching to form a kind of cathedral roof overhead. No temple carved by human hands could rival it. No hall of kings could hold such grace. The air itself was the incense of pine and cedar, of earth still warm from the sun but cooling beneath the night. Caliph breathed slowly, his chest rising and falling with a rhythm that seemed to match the rustle of leaves. The forest was not silent. It was alive with a quiet tapestry of sound. An owl stirred somewhere above, its wings whispering through the dark. The brook that had followed him from the village continued its journey here, slipping over stones with a murmur as soft as lullaby. Crickets played their delicate music, steady and patient, filling the air like threads of gold. Now and again, Caliph paused, not because he was uncertain, but because there was no need to rush. He placed a hand upon the rough bark of an oak, feeling its strength beneath his palm. He bent once to touch a fern that curled like a sleeping child against the earth. Each gesture was an exchange, his presence answered by the forest with calm acknowledgement. Ahead, the trees thickened, their trunks rising tall and proud, their crowns catching the moonlight like silver crowns. The air cooled further, carrying with it a faint perfume, wildflowers blooming unseen, hidden in the undergrowth. Caliph inhaled, the fragrance mingling with memory. He had walked this path before, though never in search of anything. Tonight was no different. He sought not answers nor destinations. He sought simply to walk, to listen. The distant song of the nymphs drifted faintly through the branches. It was not constant. It rose and fell like the wind itself, as if the trees carried fragments of their voices from hidden clearings and secret streams. Sometimes it seemed close, brushing just beyond the next bend. Other times, it floated as though miles away, a dream half remembered. Caliph did not chase it. He let it come as it would, allowing the night to weave its music at its own pace. He remembered the stories told in Arinder, that the nymphs were not bound by time as men were. They sang for the moon, for the stars, for the rivers, for themselves. Their songs had no beginning and no end, only a flow like water, endless and unbroken. To listen was to feel oneself unknotted, each thought loosening until only calm remained. Caliph's steps carried him deeper, the forest folding around him like a cloak. Fireflies drifted in small clusters, their glow rising and falling like tiny lanterns hung upon invisible strings. They gathered near a fallen log, illuminating the moss that grew thick upon it, then scattered upward into the branches, where they seemed to join the stars themselves. He paused at the brook, kneeling upon a stone to watch it pass. Its surface gleamed with silver light, each ripple carrying a fragment of the moon across its skin. He dipped his fingers into the water, feeling its coolness seep into his skin. The brook did not resist him. It moved around him, steady and sure, continuing its endless journey. Rising once more, Caliph followed its path a little longer. The sound of water grew softer, replaced by the whisper of pines. The air shifted subtly, carrying with it a note of music, clearer now, though still distant. He lifted his gaze, and for a moment thought he saw movement between the trees. A figure pale as moonlight, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. But he did not quicken his pace. If the nymphs wished to be seen, they would. If not, their song alone was enough. The forest floor was soft beneath him, layered with leaves that cushioned each step. Roots curled like gentle fingers across the path, guiding rather than hindering him. Above, the branches swayed with a sound like breath, each movement releasing another shimmer of moonlight that fell in patterns across his cloak. Caliph thought of the village then, of Leora at her garden, of Branthose by his forge, of Silwen at her loom. He imagined them hearing the same faint notes carried from the forest, each in their own way, each folded into piece by the same unseen chorus. Greendale did not end at its cottages or square. It extended here, into the forest, into the quiet song that bound them all together. At last he came to a small clearing where the path widened into a circle of soft grass. The trees leaned outward here, creating a space where the sky poured through unbroken. Stars shimmered above, countless and steady, and the moon rested just beyond the tallest pine, its glow bathing the clearing in silver. The brook skirted one side of it, its voice softer now, as though hushed in reverence. Caliph stepped into the clearing and lowered himself to the ground. The grass bent easily beneath him, cool and damp with dew. He stretched his legs before him, resting his arms upon his knees, and let his gaze wander the heavens. The nymph's song drifted again, clearer now, though still without words. He felt it more than heard it, a vibration in the air, a calmness in his chest. Here, in the forest's embrace, time itself seemed to pause. The world was not waiting for dawn, nor holding its breath for change. It was simply being, unfolding in steady rhythm, moment by moment, breath by breath. Caliph felt himself part of it, not separate, not searching, but belonging. The clearing was a cradle, the stars its canopy, the brook its lullaby. And as he sat there, listening to the forest's midnight hymn, Caliph felt his thoughts quiet, his breath deepen, and his spirit rest. Chapter 5: The Moonlit Gathering. The clearing lay quiet, wrapped in silver and shadow. Caliph sat in stillness, his breath moving in slow rhythm with the forest around him. For a long while, he thought he was alone. Yet as the brook whispered and the crickets played, something began to shift in the air, so softly that it was almost unnoticed at first. The moonlight grew brighter, though the moon itself had not moved. Its glow seemed to thicken, to take on a softness more alive than light alone. The grass shimmered faintly as though each blade was tipped with crystal dew, though no dew had yet fallen. The trees around the clearing leaned subtly inward, not closing but embracing, their branches swaying in a harmony too gentle to be called wind. And then, from between the trunks, figures began to emerge. They did not arrive suddenly, nor all at once. They drifted like mist, like fragments of light woven into form. Their steps made no sound upon the earth, though the grass bent kindly beneath them. Their hair caught the moonlight and held it, shimmering in waves of silver, pale gold, and faint blue. Their eyes glowed faintly, not like fire, but like water that holds the reflection of the stars. Caliph did not move. He did not need to. The nymph's presence was not one that demanded reaction. It invited stillness, as though their very existence was woven of calm. He lowered his gaze slightly, not from fear, but from reverence, as though he were looking upon a part of the night itself. They gathered in the center of the clearing, their figures faint yet clear, like a memory too vivid to fade. Some stood near the brook, their hands trailing lightly in the water, sending ripples that glimmered as they spread. Others moved across the grass in slow arcs, their feet leaving no mark, their robes whispering like silk against the air. A few tilted their heads upward, gazing upon the stars as though listening to a voice only they could hear. Then the song began again. It was soft at first, a single note carried on the night air, so pure it seemed to silence even the crickets. Another voice joined it, weaving beneath like the roots of a tree supporting its trunk. Then another, higher, brighter, lifting the harmony until the entire clearing was wrapped in sound. The nymphs sang not with urgency, not with words, but with tones that felt as ancient as the stones, as gentle as a mother's hand. Caliph felt it move through him. His heart slowed, his breath deepened, and every part of him seemed to loosen as though each note untied a knot he had not known was there. The song was not for him, and yet it was. It was for the forest, for the moon, for the brook, for the stars. And he, sitting quietly among them, was part of all these things. One nymph turned her gaze toward him, her eyes reflecting the silver of the brook. She did not approach, did not speak, yet in her gaze Caliph felt an understanding, not of his life, nor his thoughts, but of his place within this moment. Small, steady, safe. She lifted her hand briefly, and the song swelled, as though her gesture was a thread woven into the greater tapestry. The brook's voice blended with theirs, its ripples keeping time like a drumbeat softened to water. The leaves above whispered in rhythm, their movements part of the song's breath. Even the fireflies had gathered now, drifting in clusters that pulsed with light, rising and falling in time with the music. Caliph closed his eyes. He did not need to see, for the sound alone painted the world in light. He imagined roots sinking deep into the earth beneath him, stars settling gently upon his shoulders, his breath weaving with the song until he could not tell where he ended and the night began. When he opened his eyes again, the nymphs had moved closer, though never intruding. They circled one another slowly, their robes trailing light, their voices weaving endlessly. One dipped her hand into the brook and lifted it, droplets of silver spilling like jewels across the grass. Another bent toward a flower unseen in the shadows, coaxing it open so that its pale petals caught the moon. Time no longer seemed to pass. The song stretched without end, each note folding into the next like waves upon a shore. Caliph felt no urge to sleep, no urge to wake, only to remain, to listen, to breathe. At last, the song began to soften, not with suddenness, but with the patience of a fire burning down to embers. Voices thinned, one by one, until only a single tone remained, steady and soft, like the last glimmer of lantern light before dawn. Then even that note faded, leaving only the brook, the crickets, the whisper of leaves. The nymphs stood still a moment longer, their eyes lifted to the moon. Then, as silently as they had come, they began to drift away. One by one, they stepped back into the shadows of the trees, their forms dissolving into mist, into light, into air. Soon the clearing was empty once more, empty yet not, for their presence lingered like perfume, like warmth, like the memory of a dream that does not fade upon waking. Caliph remained seated on the grass. His heart was slow, steady. His breath was deep, even. His thoughts were quiet, as though the song still moved within him, circling endlessly. He looked once to the brook, to the stars, to the silver moon above, and he whispered, though no one was there to hear, "Peace." The forest answered in its own way, with the rustle of leaves, with the sigh of wind, with the endless lull of water. And Caliph, resting in the moonlit clearing, closed his eyes once more. Chapter 6. Whispers of Dawn. The night had been long, yet it had not been heavy. It stretched in a gentle stillness, as though the valley itself had been wrapped in a dream. The stars had lingered faithfully overhead, their silver light watching over each leaf and stone, while the forest beyond Greendale sang with the hushed music of crickets and the faint voices of unseen nymphs. Caliph stirred slowly as the darkness began to thin. His eyes opened not with haste, but with the quiet rhythm of someone rising into wakefulness as naturally as a tide lifts with the moon. Around him, the air was cool, touched with the faintest hint of warmth, as though dawn had been softly brushing her hand along the horizon, preparing the sky for its gradual unveiling. He did not rise immediately. Instead, he remained where he lay, listening to the stillness. The hush of night had not yet fully dissolved, but within it came new notes, the first cautious chirps of morning birds, the distant stir of a brook as it shifted beneath the weight of fresh light, and the whisper of leaves beginning to move again with a breeze more awake than it had been an hour before. Caliph finally sat up, stretching his arms as though he were reaching for the sky itself. His cloak, drawn over him during the night, slipped softly down his shoulders, folding into the grass that was cool with dew. He breathed deeply, filling his lungs with air so clean and pure it seemed to wash him from the inside out. The meadow around him glowed faintly. A soft mist had gathered during the night, and it clung now to the low grasses, weaving around them like silken threads. Each blade of grass carried a bead of dew, and these caught the first faint light as though the meadow had been scattered with crystals. Beyond, the forest still held its shadows, but even they seemed gentler now, softened by the veil of morning. He stood, brushing the dew from his cloak, and began to walk slowly toward the brook. Each step was unhurried, the damp grass cushioning his boots, the cool earth grounding him in the rhythm of the valley's waking breath. The brook greeted him with its own dawn song. Its water, which had shimmered silver beneath the moon, now carried the first reflections of pale amber and rose, rippling with the colors of a sky still hesitant to declare the day. He knelt beside it, cupping his hands to gather its coolness. The water tasted of stone and moss, of roots hidden deep within the earth, of something older than the village yet as gentle as a lullaby. As he drank, Caliph heard the world opening further. Birds gathered their courage, filling the air with song in layered threads. One voice would call, another would answer, then another, until the forest seemed alive with a symphony of tiny throats. The sound was not hurried or loud. It rose like incense, curling into the still air, weaving itself into the morning mist. Caliph lingered by the brook, watching as a heron lifted gracefully from its shadowed bank, its wings long and deliberate, its body rising like a slow exhale against the pale sky. Fish stirred beneath the surface, scattering ripples outward until the light itself seemed to move with them. He thought of Greendale still folded in sleep. Its cottages would be holding warmth from the night's fires, their shutters keeping out the last whispers of darkness. Isolde would still be resting, though soon her hands would stir flour and knead dough with the steady patience of one who knew the village's hunger before it was spoken. Merrick, too, might be dreaming still, his lute silent for now, awaiting the sun before it strung the air with melody. Caliph smiled faintly at these thoughts, comforted by the knowledge that life in Greendale flowed with such gentle certainty. Each soul, each hearth, each task belonged to the rhythm of the whole, like instruments in a song no one had composed yet everyone knew. The sky shifted again. The pale amber deepened, drawing faint streaks of rose across the horizon. The mist began to lift in slow, delicate folds, revealing more of the meadow, more of the forest edge, more of the hills beyond. It was as though the world were unveiling itself piece by piece, careful not to overwhelm the eye but instead to coax it awake, the way one might rouse a child from sleep with a soft hand upon the shoulder. Caliph walked along the brook's edge, his hands trailing across reeds damp with dew. His boots pressed softly into the soil, leaving faint imprints that would soon be kissed away by sunlight. He paused when he reached a willow whose branches leaned low, their leaves dripping silver droplets into the current. Beneath it, the brook widened slightly, forming a small pool where water striders danced across the surface, their delicate legs barely dimpling the skin of the stream. He sat there for a time, leaning against the willow's trunk, the bark pressed firm and cool against his back, while above him the leaves shivered with every breath of breeze, their sound like a hush, a secret shared only with those who cared to linger. He closed his eyes, letting that sound fold into him. The forest nymphs, he thought, might be singing still. Their songs, too delicate for mortal ears to always catch, might be carried in the sigh of leaves, in the murmur of water, in the faint perfume of morning blossoms opening to light. Perhaps it was not only birds who sang the dawn awake, but spirits older, voices woven into the roots of trees and the veins of stone. The lane back to Greendale curved gently, its stones dark with dew, its edges softened by wildflowers now beginning to open. Each bloom turned subtly toward the light, their petals trembling in the cool air. A butterfly, slow from the chill, clung to one stem, its wings folded like a letter not yet opened. As Caliph entered the village's edge, he felt the first stirrings of life. Smoke curled thin from a single chimney, pale against the dark roofs. A door creaked softly open, and a farmer stepped out, stretching much as Caliph had done earlier, his breath visible in the cool air. Their eyes met briefly, and though no words passed between them, there was acknowledgement in that glance. A quiet bond shared in the sacred hour of day's beginning. Caliph moved onward to the square. The fountain glimmered faintly with reflected sky, its surface just beginning to catch the colors of morning. The lanterns, though now dimmed, still held a trace of glow, their flames lingering stubbornly before yielding to the greater light. He sat once more upon the fountain's rim, folding his hands loosely, breathing deeply of the air that was no longer night yet not entirely day. Around him, Greendale stirred slowly, carefully, as though each cottage, each field, each life wished to honor the quiet before embracing the fullness of day. And Caliph, resting in the cradle of this moment, knew that the whispers of dawn were not fleeting. They were a promise that every day would arrive as gently as this, with no haste, no demand, but only the steady gift of light returning once more. Chapter 7. The Meadows' Embrace. The morning had ripened gently, each moment unfolding like the soft turn of a page. By the time Caliph reached the meadow that stretched beyond Greendale's quiet cottages, the sun was high enough to warm his shoulders but not yet so strong as to chase away the coolness of dawn. The air here was wide and generous, free of walls or roofs, filled instead with the sway of grasses and the whisper of blooms. The meadow greeted him as though it had been waiting all along. Wildflowers stretched across the field in waves of color. Pale blues, tender pinks, and soft yellows, scattered like brushstrokes on a canvas of green. Each petal seemed to hold a shimmer of dew still clinging from the morning, sparkling faintly whenever the breeze coaxed them to move. The grass bent and sighed, its sound soft and continuous, like the gentle hush of a lullaby. Caliph paused at the meadow's edge, his boots sinking slightly into the soil softened by spring. He let the wind carry itself around him, tugging lightly at the edge of his cloak, lifting strands of his hair. It was not a commanding wind, not harsh or hurried, but a companionable one, like a friend who speaks softly, with no need for insistence. He stepped forward, and the meadow seemed to open around him. Each stride pressed the grass down only briefly before it rose again, resilient, continuing its dance with the breeze. He lowered a hand as he walked, letting his fingers brush over flower tops and grass tips, feeling their delicate textures slip across his skin. The touch was feather-light, yet grounding, each caress a reminder of the simple, unbroken rhythm of the earth. In the heart of the meadow, the air carried a fragrance so gentle it seemed woven from memory itself. Sweetness of blossoms, faint spice of clover, freshness of clean soil. Together they created a perfume that could not be bottled, only breathed in, only savored while standing within the meadow's embrace. Caliph drew it deep into his lungs, holding it there as though it might steady not just his body, but his thoughts. He thought then of how the nymphs had sung the night before. Their melody lingered within him still, not in sharp recollection but as a soft undertone, like the faint hum of bees far off in the blossoms. He wondered whether their voices had drifted across this meadow too, gliding over the grasses as moonlight does when it spills over rooftops. Perhaps the flowers themselves remembered the song, carrying it in their petals, humming it soundlessly into the air. Finding a place where the grass grew especially thick, Caliph lowered himself to the earth. The meadow welcomed him gently, cushioning him with its layered softness, supporting him as though it had always held a space for him. He stretched his legs, leaned back on his hands, and let his gaze wander upward. The sky above the meadow was clear, pale blue fading into almost white where the sun rested high. A single cloud drifted there, slow and unhurried, trailing across the heavens with the patience of eternity. Caliph watched it for a long while, following its shape as it shifted slowly, turning from a drifting plume into something rounder, softer, dissolving into nothingness. The watching calmed him, the way a slow stream soothes by reminding one of time's quiet flow. A bird startled lightly from the grass nearby, a skylark, its wings flashing briefly as it rose into the air. Its song trilled bright and high, threading through the meadow like a ribbon of music. Caliph followed it with his eyes until it disappeared into the height of the sky, its song fading into distance. He smiled faintly, warmed not just by the sun but by the simple presence of life that thrived so easily here. Time in the meadow stretched and softened. It did not pass in minutes, nor in hours, but in sensations. The warmth of sunlight against his cheek, the brush of grass against his arm, the fragrance of blossoms carried closer whenever the breeze stirred. Each moment felt both fleeting and endless, as though he were outside of time entirely, resting in a place where only stillness mattered. When he lay back fully, the meadow folded around him like a quilt. The grass rose up on either side, tall enough to sway gently above him, framing his view of the sky. He listened, closing his eyes, letting the hum of bees and the murmur of leaves lull him further. The sounds became a rhythm, steady and unbroken, wrapping around his thoughts like a cradle. He felt himself drifting, not into sleep, but into a state of ease where the boundaries between his body and the meadow blurred. He was not separate from the grass, nor from the earth beneath it. He was part of it, resting within its heart. A memory came then, not sharp but gentle. He remembered lying as a boy in fields not unlike this, though smaller, closer to the edge of his village home. He remembered his mother's voice calling him back at dusk, and the way he had resisted leaving the grass, not out of disobedience, but because even then he had known that meadows carried a kind of magic. They spoke to something deeper than duty, deeper than the clamor of the world. They whispered of belonging, of quiet eternity. Opening his eyes, he watched as a butterfly floated past, wings painted with pale orange and soft cream. It lingered near him, dipping briefly to a flower before lifting again. He followed its path until it disappeared into the grasses. For a moment, it felt like the meadow itself had sent the butterfly to greet him, a small acknowledgement of his presence, a gesture of welcome. Eventually, Caliph shifted, though not out of discomfort. He simply wished to walk again, to feel the grass beneath his boots, to see more of the meadow's expanse. Rising slowly, brushing pollen from his cloak, he began to wander once more. Each step was quiet, absorbed into the earth's softness. He found patches where the flowers grew especially dense, painting the ground in vivid colors. He found hollows where the grass bent inward, forming small, hidden sanctuaries, perfect for resting unseen. Near the far edge of the meadow, where the trees began again, he came across a fallen log blanketed in moss. He sat upon it, running his fingers along the velvety green, feeling how the living softness clung to the wood. Birds moved in the branches overhead, their shadows flickering on the ground. He lingered there, watching, breathing, content to let the meadow hold him in stillness for as long as it wished. When the light shifted slightly, signaling the slow tilt toward afternoon, Caliph rose once more. He turned back toward the village, his steps unhurried, his heart steadied by the meadow's embrace. He knew he could return at any time. The meadow was not going anywhere. It would always be here, patient, waiting, ready to cradle him again when he sought its calm. And as he walked away, he felt it walking with him still. The scent of blossoms clinging to his cloak, the warmth of sun lingering on his skin, the memory of grasses swaying like lullabies in the breeze. Chapter 8, The Forest Path. The meadow's embrace lingered upon Caliph's shoulders long after he had stepped beyond its edge. The sense of wildflowers, the sound of larks, the softness of grass beneath his cloak, these remained with him like gentle companions, woven into the threads of his thoughts. As the sun climbed higher, spilling light across the valley, his steps carried him toward the forest, where shade and quiet awaited. The path began narrow, half hidden by the meadow's tall grasses, but soon it curved inward, swallowed by the cool shadow of trees. Here, the air shifted, no longer filled with the open warmth of morning, but with the still, green calm of the woods. It smelled of moss and bark, of earth damp with dew, of leaves that had whispered through countless seasons. Caliph slowed, letting the forest set the pace. His boots pressed softly into the soil, where roots coiled like sleeping serpents and ferns unfurled in delicate spirals. Sunlight slipped between branches in thin beams, falling across his cloak in shifting patterns. Every step forward felt as though he were stepping deeper into a place both ancient and alive. The forest did not overwhelm with noise. Instead, it sang quietly, birds hidden among branches, insects humming unseen, the faint crackle of leaves as a squirrel leapt from bough to bough. Deeper still, the brook he had left behind whispered its echo, threading itself faintly into the woodland air. Caliph lifted a hand to the nearest trunk, pressing his palm against the bark. It was rough, cool, textured with ridges carved over years. He closed his eyes, breathing with it, imagining that beneath his hand ran lifelines stretching deep into the soil, carrying the same strength that had rooted the forest here since long before Greendale had been built. He walked further. The path bent in gentle curves, each turn revealing new pockets of light and shadow. At one bend, The trees parted slightly to reveal a glade where the ground was carpeted with wild violets. Their petals, soft as silk, nodded with the lightest movement of the breeze. At another, a fallen tree lay across the path, its trunk softened with moss, its hollowed bark offering shelter to mushrooms and small creatures. Caliph stepped carefully over it, feeling the give of the moss beneath his boots. Time slowed in the forest. Minutes passed as though they were hours, yet without weight, without urgency. The world beyond these trees seemed far away, dissolved into silence. Here, there was only the hush of leaves, the glimmer of filtered sun, the sense that the forest itself watched over him as a patient guardian. Caliph found a place where two great oaks arched together, their branches meeting high above to form a natural archway. He paused beneath it, tilting his head back to look at the canopy. Leaves swayed gently, their undersides catching flashes of silver light, while birds moved unseen within their shelter. It felt to him like a threshold, though not into danger or unknown, but into deeper stillness, into a place where the forest held its heart. He stepped through. Beyond the arch, the air seemed cooler, quieter. A stream wound here, narrower than the brook, slipping between stones with a soft murmur. Its surface caught glints of light like scattered coins. Caliph knelt beside it, tracing the water with his fingertips. The coolness lingered on his skin long after he drew his hand away, as though the stream had left behind a part of its own endless patience. He sat there for a while, resting against the trunk of a tree whose roots curved outward to form a natural seat. The earth was firm, grounding him, and the air smelled richly of pine. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, letting the forest's music fold around him. It was then he thought of the midnight songs of the Nymphs. He had not heard them since the night before, yet here, in the hush of day, he wondered if their voices lingered still, woven into the rustle of leaves, into the trickle of streams, into the silence that pressed so gently against his ears. Perhaps their song was not only for midnight. Perhaps it lived here always, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those willing to listen without demand. Opening his eyes, he watched a pair of doves descend to drink from the stream. Their movements were unhurried, their wings folding with soft precision, their coos blending into the forest's lull. He smiled faintly, his heart warmed by the quiet companionship of creatures who asked nothing more than to share the space with him. Further along the path, he continued, following its meander deeper beneath the trees. He noticed how the air shifted with every turn, sometimes cooler, sometimes touched with the faint sweetness of blossoms unseen. He noticed how the light dappled the ground in patches, so that walking felt like moving through a quilt of sun and shadow. At one point, he came across a clearing where an ancient stone stood upright, moss covering most of its surface. Its shape was weathered, its edges softened, as though centuries of rain and wind had carved it into near roundness. Caliph touched it gently, feeling the cool stone beneath his fingers. He wondered who had placed it here and why. Perhaps it was a marker, perhaps nothing more than chance. But it felt like a reminder that lives before his own had walked these paths, had paused here, had listened to the same forest whispers. The thought did not stir restlessness. It calmed him further, for it reminded him that time itself was part of the forest's stillness. People came and went, but the trees remained. The stream flowed, the earth held its place. In this balance, he felt safe, as though he were part of something unbroken. Caliph lingered until the sun had begun its slow descent, the light shifting from gold to softer amber. Shadows grew longer, pooling at the bases of trunks, stretching across the path like dark ribbons. The air cooled, carrying with it the faint fragrance of evening blossoms preparing to open. He turned then, not out of need, but from the gentle certainty that it was time. His steps carried him back toward the village, retracing the path with the same unhurried rhythm as before. Each bend, each glade, each arch of branches welcomed him again, as though acknowledging that one who walked with respect always walked as a friend. When at last he stepped from the forest shade back into the open, the meadow welcomed him once more with its wide expanse of swaying grasses. The sky above was shifting toward twilight, streaked with rose and violet, the first star daring to appear before the others. Caliph paused at the edge, turning once to glance back into the forest. The trees stood quiet, their shadows deepening, their branches swaying gently in farewell. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of thanks, then continued onward toward Greendale. The path was soft beneath his boots, the air cool upon his face, and within him, the forest remained. A quiet strength, a steady rhythm, a song that needed no words. Chapter 9. The Lanterns of Evening. The day waned gently, as though it too understood the importance of moving slowly, of lowering itself with patience. Sunlight stretched longer across the fields, gilding the meadow in threads of gold before dimming into a softer warmth. Shadows grew, but they were not harsh. They elongated kindly, blending into the earth with ease, as if they were part of the evening's natural song. Caliph walked the path back toward Greendale, his steps measured, his body unhurried. The meadow had left its imprint upon him, and now every sound and scent of the village seemed to arrive softened, as though filtered through the memory of blossoms swaying in the wind. His boots pressed against the soil with quiet certainty, and he let himself savor the rhythm of each stride, the way it echoed the slow beating of his heart. By the time he reached the first cottages, the lanterns had begun to glow. Each one had been lit with care, their flames steady and small, casting circles of amber light upon doors and windows. The lanterns were not simply practical things. They were guardians of warmth, each one like a miniature hearth glowing against the oncoming night. As Caliph passed, he found himself watching how the flames flickered within their glass casings, reflections shifting like tiny dances across the cobblestones. The square was alive, though not in the boisterous way of markets or fairs. Instead, it hummed with the quiet activity of neighbors preparing for evening. Merrick stood outside his inn, securing shutters with deliberate movements. His expression, softened by age, turned to Caliph as he passed, and he raised a hand in greeting. The gesture carried no words, but it spoke enough. Recognition, peace, a shared belonging in this moment of transition between day and night. Nearby, Isolde was gathering baskets left outside her bakery, her apron dusted faintly with flour. Caliph inhaled deeply as he passed, letting the fragrance wrap around him, grounding him further in the familiarity of village life. At the fountain, where he so often paused, he found Leora arranging small jars of blossoms, wildflowers gathered from the fields, set in vases of clear glass to catch the last of the sun's rays. She glanced up briefly, her eyes bright even in the dimming light, and gave him a smile as soft as the petals she held. Her presence, like the lanterns, seemed part of the evening's ritual, an assurance that beauty and care would always find their place, even as night arrived. Caliph moved slowly to the fountain's edge and lowered himself onto the stone rim. The water shimmered faintly, catching lantern glow as though holding pieces of fire within its surface. Its trickle was calm, steady, blending with the faint murmur of voices and the occasional call of a bird settling into its nest. From where he sat, he could see the entire square shifting gently into night. One by one, shutters closed. One by one, lanterns brightened, their glow collecting like constellations across the village. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint spice of burning wood from hearth fires, mingling with lavender and herbs drifting from gardens nearby. He let his eyes close for a moment, listening. The village had its own evening song, subtle, unforced, built from the overlapping threads of ordinary sounds. A dog sighing as it curled upon a doorstep, a child's laugh fading into a mother's low voice calling them inside, the creak of a chair as someone settled onto their porch. All of it formed a tapestry that was not loud, yet endlessly rich. It was the music of lives intertwining quietly, without rush, without demand. After some time, Caliph rose again. His body carried no fatigue, only a softness, as though the day had unwound him carefully and now prepared him for the stillness ahead. He walked toward the narrow lane leading past Serena's garden. Even now, the scent of herbs lingered on the air: lavender, thyme, rosemary, each note distinct yet blending seamlessly. In the dim light, the leaves appeared darker, their outlines blurred, but their presence was unmistakable. They seemed to whisper a good night of their own, steady and watchful. Further along the path, he came to a cluster of cottages where smoke still curled faintly from chimneys. He caught glimpses through windows, families gathering around tables, bowls of stew steaming, firelight painting walls in gold. These small scenes, private yet familiar, warmed him in a way no grand hall or castle could. They were reminders of the kingdom's heart, the simple, steady lives lived in harmony with the land. As twilight deepened, the first stars emerged. Caliph paused to watch them. They blinked into view shyly at first, scattered faintly across the heavens, then grew in number, forming patterns he had long known. He whispered their names to himself: Orion's belt, the stag, the river, each one like an old friend returning. They stretched above the village as though promising that even in darkness, there would always be light to guide. At the far edge of the square, an elder was lighting a cluster of lanterns strung between posts. The glass globes glowed in soft hues, some amber, some pale green, some tinged with rose. Together, they formed a canopy of warmth that swayed gently in the evening breeze. Children, still lingering outside, laughed softly as the lights flickered above them, their voices fading as they were gathered home. Caliph lingered beneath the lanterns, tilting his head back to watch how they swayed. Against the darkening sky, their glow looked like captured stars, lowered to earth so the village might share in their gentle radiance. He breathed in deeply, feeling his chest rise and fall with steady calm. It was here, under the lanterns, that he felt the day's journey, meadow, village, voices, stillness, collect into a single, unbroken thread. When at last he turned toward his own cottage, the night had nearly settled in full. The square was quiet, though not empty. It thrummed with the quiet presence of lives moving into rest, of lantern flames guarding doorways, of the fountain whispering unendingly. Each step home felt like walking deeper into a lullaby, each shadow cast by lantern light a reminder that darkness here was never unwelcome, never lonely. Caliph's cottage awaited him with its simple door, its small window glowing faintly from the embers he had left behind. He stepped inside, closing the door gently, leaving the lantern-lit square behind. The air within smelled faintly of wood smoke and linen, of hearth and home. He removed his cloak, set aside his boots, and moved through the small motions of evening with quiet reverence, adding a log to the hearth, washing his hands in cool water, straightening the blanket on his bed. Each act was small, yet together they formed a ritual, a way of saying, the day is complete, the night is welcome. When at last he sat at the edge of his bed, he let his gaze drift once more through the window. The lanterns in the square flickered faintly, just visible between rooftops. Above them, stars multiplied, filling the heavens with quiet light. Caliph breathed deeply, letting the sight rest within him, a final image to carry into sleep. Chapter 10. The Night's Embrace. Night in Greendale did not arrive suddenly, nor with any weight that might press upon the village. It unfolded as gently as a quilt being drawn across a child, each corner tucked with care, each fold laid with patience. Darkness was not something to fear here. It was a companion, arriving faithfully to soothe, to rest, and to remind every creature that the world could be safe even in shadow. The lanterns, already glowing along the lanes and the square, seemed to lean inward with the deepening dark. Their flames burned low and steady, less like beacons and more like guardians, soft eyes watching over doorways, keeping gentle company through the long hours ahead. Above, the moon reached its height, bright and silvery, spreading a glow across rooftops and meadow grass, a light so tender it felt like the touch of a hand upon a brow. Caliph walked slowly through the last turns of the evening, his steps unhurried, as though he, too, had been wrapped in the calm the night carried. The cobblestones beneath him gleamed faintly, carrying lantern glow in small, flickering pools. The air was cool but kind, the sort of air that welcomed lungs to breathe deeply, as if each breath were a gift. As he passed the fountain in the square, he paused one last time. The water trickled, a steady song that never ceased, as though to remind all who lived here that life continued in gentle measure, regardless of hour. Reflections trembled upon its surface. Stars above, lanterns nearby, and Caliph himself, his face softened by the glow. He leaned forward slightly, trailing his fingers along the cool stone, then let them rest upon his lap as he closed his eyes, listening. Around him, the village whispered itself into slumber. A shutter clicked into place, its wooden tone muted but certain. Somewhere down the lane, a mother sang to her child, her voice a low lullaby, the words indistinct but the melody carried like a cradle sway. A cartwheel creaked faintly as it was shifted into shelter. The sounds did not disturb. They soothed, layering one atop another until they became part of the night's embrace. He rose again and walked toward his own cottage, his cloak trailing lightly behind him. Each step felt softer than the last, as though the very ground wished to ease him homeward. When at last he reached his door, he laid a hand upon the wood and breathed in the fragrance of the air one final time. Lavender, faint smoke, earth, and the promise of rest. Inside, his cottage welcomed him as warmly as any hearth. The faint glow of embers still lingered upon the hearthstone, pulsing with orange light. The scent of wood lingered in the beams above, mingling with the faint aroma of herbs he had hung earlier in the week. He moved through the familiar rhythm of closing the day, cloak upon the peg, boots placed neatly aside, basin set beneath the table. His hands brushed over the table's smooth surface, the grain warm with memory, and he allowed himself a small smile. He knelt by the hearth and placed a small log upon the embers. It caught slowly, unfurling into flame not with urgency, but with patience, as though it knew there was no rush in Greendale. The light spread across the walls, painting them with amber glow that mingled with the silver moonlight streaming through the window. Between the two, his cottage was transformed into a sanctuary of gold and silver, warmth and calm. Caliph sat for a moment upon the rug before the hearth, letting the fire's warmth brush against his hands. His gaze drifted to the window, where the moon was framed perfectly, its light spilling upon the sill like water. He thought of the meadow, of the brook's gentle voice, of the lanterns swaying softly in the square. Each memory wove itself into the fabric of the present, until he could no longer tell whether he was remembering the day or still living within its echoes. At last, he rose and prepared for rest. His bed was simple, but it welcomed him with familiar softness. The blanket, woven thick, carried the faint scent of lavender from Serena's garden, woven into the fabric long ago when she had gifted it to him. The pillow cradled his head as though it had been shaped to him alone, and the mattress accepted his weight with ease, carrying him as though upon quiet waters. He lay upon his side, his face turned toward the window. The moon shone steady, a sentinel in the sky, while stars glittered faintly, countless and untroubled. Their light mingled with the soft flicker of the fire, so that his room felt held between two worlds, one of earth, one of sky, both in perfect balance. His breathing slowed. Inhale, exhale. Each breath was a tide, rolling in and out, bringing him deeper into the calm the night had promised. He could still hear the fountain faintly, even through the walls of his cottage, its endless murmur a lullaby of stone and water. The crickets sang, the leaves rustled in the gentlest of breezes, and beyond it all, silence stretched wide and comforting. Caliph thought, just before his eyes grew too heavy, of the kingdom beyond the valley. Fields, forests, rivers, all of them likely wrapped in the same calm, all of them breathing with the same rhythm of night. He thought, too, of the forest nymphs whose songs had accompanied his journey, soft voices hidden in the trees, weaving the night with their melodies. Perhaps, even now, they sang somewhere beyond the meadow, their music blending with the stars. He let that thought rest upon him like a final blanket. The idea of voices unseen, yet always present, keeping the world gentle and safe. As his eyes closed, the night seemed to lean nearer, its embrace tender and sure. The moon kept watch, the stars whispered their endless constancy. The fire warmed the air with amber glow, and the lanterns in the square flickered like guardians keeping vigil. Greendale slept, and within it, Caliph was carried into sleep as well. Not into darkness, not into silence, but into light made soft, sound made gentle, and peace made whole. And in that peace, the story of his day folded closed, leaving only stillness, safety, and the endless embrace of the night.